City Council and the city's administration have been working with our partners from the Let's Safe Cleveland Coalition for many months now, especially with the policy committee of that coalition, to craft recommendations which went to the council at the beginning of May. Council got 33 recommendations from the policy committee. Those recommendations aim to enhance and improve Let's Safe efforts in the city. These recommendations and the work leading up to the submission of the recommendations helped inform both the ordinance and the resolution that are before you today. It's important to understand that this legislative effort is a culmination of the policy committee, the council, and the city administration working together to craft legislation that is workable and enforceable. Ultimately, this is the city's legislation to pass and to implement and enforce, which is why it is so important that those who must implement and enforce it are involved in the creation of the legislation. To ensure that we pass an ordinance that we believe is workable and enforceable, that the city believes it can execute, that can be effective, and that can truly help decrease childhood lead poisoning in Cleveland. Even prior to council's work with the coalition, we knew that lead poisoning is a serious threat to the health of the city's children. Lead-based paint was banned in the United States in 1978, but it is still the #1 source of lead exposure to children in the country and here in Cleveland. The majority of residential structures in Cleveland were built before 1978 and are more likely to have lead-based paint hazards. In our work with the policy committee, we know that Cleveland children living in residential rental units built before 1978 are disproportionately at risk for unsafe levels of lead exposure from lead-based paint hazards. Most kids in Cleveland are transient, so one of the more effective ways of combating lead poisoning is to take preventative measures to get to the source of the problem, which is the housing, the building, and take steps to make the structure lead safe before a child becomes poisoned. With that, we've come to craft Ordinance 747, 2019. The heart of that ordinance requires what we are calling lead safe certification. Beginning in March 1st, 2021, all residential rental units constructed before January 1st, 1978 must have a lead safe certification from the Director of Building and Housing, according to a schedule which will be established by the Director. All units must be certified lead safe by March 1st, 2023. Lead safe certification requires that the owner of the rental unit provide the director with a copy of either a clearance examination report or a lead risk assessment that will show that lead hazards were not identified in their unit. The rental unit lead examinations must be performed by a clearance technician, lead inspector, or lead risk assessor under the procedures that are outlined in state law. The ordinance also establishes disclosure requirements in the sale or lease of target housing, which is that built before 1978, to include whether the property or the unit is under a lead hazard control order. Requires sellers of 1, 2, 3, or 4 unit dwellings to furnish to the purchaser a certificate of disclosure that addresses the condition of the property and will include the current lead status of the property. The legislation creates a lead safe auditor position who will monitor the lead safe certification process that we are implementing. The auditor will maintain a list of certified inspectors and contractors, as well as coordinate regular monitoring and reporting with a lead safe advisory board, which we are also establishing through the legislation. This lead safe advisory board will consist of 7 members. 6 are appointed by the mayor with the approval of council, and 1 member will be appointed by the council who will be a member of the council. At least 2 members are to be representatives from the Lead Safe Cleveland Coalition. The Lead Safe auditor will also be a member of the board, and 1 member will be a current member of the Cleveland Area Board of Realtors. The board is established to provide recommendations for improvements to the city's lead safe policies and procedures, will report on progress and status of the city's lead safe certification requirement and other lead poisoning prevention related efforts. The board will also work with partners to produce impact analyses of the lead safe certification program and disseminate all those results. The ordinance further requires an examination of the lead safe certification program within 1 year after its implementation and every year thereafter to review the impacts of this certification requirement, to determine if tenants have been unduly displaced, and to identify any other negative, unintended consequences that may have occurred due to its implementation. If negative impacts are occurring or have occurred, the city will reevaluate the program and work toward eliminating any of those negative impacts. The ordinance also calls for the creation of a lead screening and testing commission. This commission will be made up of healthcare institutions and healthcare providers, representatives from the school system, and early childhood education providers. The responsibility of this lead screening and testing commission will include establishing best practices for the efficient and effective coordination of screening and testing services for families that are at risk or that have been exposed to lead hazards. The commission will also partner with organizations to implement screening and testing recommendations and coordinate and share lead screening and testing data among appropriate entities. And finally, the ordinance calls for the establishment of a lead-safe housing action board for the purpose of supporting families who must relocate as a result of a lead hazard control order, lead-safe maintenance, or lead poisoning. The action board is to be made up of representatives from local nonprofit entities that are funded by the city and that provide housing in the city. This action board will include maintaining a list of housing units available for families forced to relocate and providing help with problems that arise as a result of the forced relocation. Those are some of the main, those are the main aspects of Ordinance 747, 2019.
Thank you, Ms. Galish, and thank you for all your hard work on that legislation. We worked very closely with the administration, the policy committee, as well as crafting this legislation, as well as the mayor is a co-sponsor of this legislation with myself and my colleagues. So that being said, I would like to hear from the administration and get your feedback and your thoughts on this legislation. And then I'll open it up for questions from myself and my colleagues. Director Donald and then Director Gordon.
I'm remiss to say if I'm just honored to be here and part of this process. It has been a long time coming. We have worked diligently on the administration side to think of ways to solve this problem. In 2017, the rental inspection unit was formulated in the Department of Building and Housing. That was the first step. For a couple of years prior to that, the Healthy Homes Interdepartmental Initiative was created. And we just had different ways that the administration could really focus on this challenge. So just as a reminder, and keeping this in a framework as we look at implementing the legislation and particularly the lead safe certificate. The department so far, over the past 2 years, we've inspected over 13,000 rental units throughout the city for all types of safety, health issues. We've tested over 1,600 units for lead. So this is not a new idea as far as going into properties, testing rental units, and certifying them as lead safe. However, it kicks it up. A notch is not even as an understatement. It takes it to a level that we can hold landlords accountable for the conditions of their units, particularly the lead status of their units. We're looking forward to implementing this program, starting in 2021, with requiring all rental units to be certified lead safe. We are working currently on figuring out how to administer that program, how to roll it out. And we are taking into consideration the will of landlords, of administration, of council to make sure we do this expeditiously, but also in a fair and sustainable way. Solving this problem does require all of us. We sit here at this table united, the administration, the community, and the Let's Safe Coalition by initially putting forth the 33 recommendations in council to solve this problem. We look at this as the first step. Absolutely nothing is perfect. Nothing was perfect when we instituted the rental inspection unit. This is the first step. This legislation is the next step after that to make sure that we hold the landlords accountable to where they need to be, and to make sure also that resources are put in place to help those landlords get to the place they need to be to have safe units for tenants. There are further discussions that need to be had. There have been 2 community meetings so far. We look forward to all of the feedback and in the implementation process, as well as the legislative process, to make sure that this is smooth for everyone that is involved. I believe that Rachel hit all of the highlights of the legislation. The Department of Building and Housing, of course, is the main department that will be affected by this legislation. We have definitely begun to look at what it will take to implement. It's not just a behind-the-scenes administration issue, it's also a resource issue, not just for funding, but a resource people issue of who will conduct the inspections and administer the tests that need to be done on all the units. However, with this community, people that are here in the room today and people that are before me, I know that this is an achievable goal and we will get to where we need to be by 2021.
Thank you, Director. I'm also going to ask Director Ward to share the comments.
Mr. Chairman, members, Cleveland City Council, thank you for having us here today. To the individuals of the public who are here today listening, really thank you so much for being so committed to this work, being so passionate about this issue, and really seeing that in order for this, for us to be able to have a lead-free, lead-safe city, we need to come together. The health department, as you all know, has been working on lead for decades. It has always been the health department's responsibility to do the investigations when a child is tested high. As you also know, and as we have testified here, the health department's position is that we cannot continue to use our children as canaries. We believe that we need to have primary prevention and secondary prevention and community engagement in order to be able to address and solve this issue. Otherwise, we will continue to have high rates of poisoned children. We continue to have this issue batted around, used as a political football, and fingers pointed, and children will continue to suffer. And as we learned today, their children and their grandchildren will suffer as well. And we want to put a stop to that, and we believe that this coming together is the only way. When we were a model city, when we had so many partners at the table and there was funding, we were looked at from all other cities around this country. How did we do what we did? We all came together. There were a lot of dollars from the CDC, there were dollars from philanthropy, from private sector, from public sector, and when that all dried up, the entire initiative dried up. We can't do that yet. We have to put in the structures and systems to make sure that this work continues. And I think with this legislation and the intention behind this legislation, the partnership that you see here, we are missing Director Maness, who is away, but community development, the law department, public utilities, these are all partners in our Healthy Homes Interdepartment initiative. We work beyond just the city of Cleveland. We've been working with the Cuyahoga County Board of Health and their work in lead as well, as along with a number of community agencies. Otherwise, again, it just goes and reverts back to something that is so insurmountable. I will say one other thing about lead, and something that in my 3 years of being at the Cleveland Department of Public Health, and I work on lead every single day. It is a very, very complex issue. It's everything about it is difficult. We know that lead is still mined, we know that lead is still in products that we use every day. It's in this device that's in front of me and in front of all of you. We know that there's legacy in our city, because we're an industrial city and it was built on what we used lead with to make sure that the industries that we are known for that utilize this method. We know that it is something that requires this entire city to get behind, and I really commend all of you for being here, for showing your support for this work, for seeing how critical this is and dedicating this kind of time to it. And so we support this legislation wholly.
Thank you, Director. And we are joined also by Chief Latoya Walker.
Good afternoon. I stand along with my colleagues as members of the administration to stand here and say we totally support this work, and we have supported this work for quite some time. I recall quite clearly 5 years ago when the first articles came out, toxic neglect, and we had to stop. It was just like what you learn when the fire department comes in and they tell you if there's a fire to stop, drop, and roll. And we stopped. We stopped inside of the administration to understand if there was any truth, what the truth was, and what was being reported. And we learned that we had some vulnerabilities. And immediately, we looked at those vulnerabilities and we came together and I met with Mayor Jackson and asked him if I could create a Healthy Homes Interdepartmental Initiative, HHII, it's what we call it. And we've had that in place now for coming up on 5 years. That idea, I didn't create that idea. When we stopped, drop, and roll, I recall meeting with Councilman Brackatelli, and we found a sheet. He had a sheet that was probably about 12 years old. It was a HUD sheet, and it was 10 recommendations to have a healthy home. So it wasn't isolated to lead, it was a sheet that talked about how do you get to a healthy home. Because in my portfolio, having health in my portfolio, along with aging and all of the people-centric departments inside my portfolio, I began to think broader. But it was that sheet that led me to, Mayor, can we create a Healthy Homes Interdepartmental Initiative? Because I immediately recognized that it was the health of the home that was causing the issue. And so it was not something that could be isolated to the Cleveland Department of Public Health. And I asked the mayor if we could create the Healthy Homes Interdepartmental Initiative comprised of the departments that have already been stated, the departments of Building and Housing, the departments of the Cleveland Department of Public Health, the Law Department, and the Department of Public Utilities, and the Law Department. Why did we need that? And Community Development, thank you, and Community Development. Because we wanted a multi-pronged solution. We wanted to come together as a city, interdepartmentally, to really begin to peel back the onion on where were there intersections, where were there duplications of effort, where was the opportunity for us to work together that we were not aware of because we were not talking about this in one place together. And I stand here along with my colleagues, proud to say for the last 5 years, every 2 weeks, twice a month, every other Tuesday, we meet at the Healthy Homes Interdepartmental Initiative to really deal with this. This work here today, under the councilman and the entire council pulling us together to deal with this work, is another example of the intersections that are required to move the work forward. The administration can't do it alone, city council can't do it alone, and this work, this legislation that we have here today is representative of public-private philanthropic partnerships. Partnerships including nonprofit organizations, parents, and those impacted by lead. That's what this is comprised of. And we felt it important to pull this together, and it's been 5 years. but I think we're doing it right. We're learning from our mistakes. We're learning from some of the mistakes of those that came before us, and we're learning from the examples across this country, some of which have been referenced here today during this conference, and what we need to be doing. What struck me from Dr. Mona today, and she said a couple things that really struck me, and when she referenced Dr. DeBose, the problem is well defined and neatly packaged. It's a social crime. And while I didn't have that quote 5 years ago when I was working with my colleagues, had that meeting with Councilman Brancatelli, we knew then that we had to bring together the interdisciplinary approach from multiple departments to get to this. And we immediately knew that we had to also include those outside of municipal government. And that's the power of this Let's Safe Coalition. That is the power of us getting it right in this community. Because the one thing that the mayor said earlier that is so true for this community, and I believe that we are unlike most communities across this country, is that when we come together, public-private philanthropic partners, we get it done. No one gets a buy, we get it done, we put it all on the table, and we figure it out. And that's what we're doing. And that's why we're here, we stand here in full support of this work with all of the partners that come to the table, all the ideas as we vet them to understand and to determine the path that we are going to take forward. Because all this is for the kids. It is for the future. The children are our future, and we have to be, while we're in these seats, we have the responsibility and the authority to protect the future. And the future are our children. And that's why it takes all of us, making the right decisions to be intentional and well thought out as we move forward in a strategy that says we can, a strategy that says we can build on it, and a strategy that says for each of us that we have did the right thing in these seats as public officials, as leaders in this community, to protect the children that will come behind us and take these seats.
Thank you so much, Chief Walker Minor, and thank you to all of the directors and skaters. I do want to acknowledge a couple of people that have joined us. Our colleague, Councilman Martin Kane, is here, so I want to acknowledge him. He is, like the kid said, by the end of the door, so he can leave when he needs to. But I did want to make sure we acknowledge him. I also want to make sure I acknowledge Representative Juanita Brent, who is here. I see Ms. Brent. I want to make sure we recognize her. The state has been our partner and really doing some great things unheard of at the state level to support this issue. And then I also want to recognize Housing Court Judge Ronald O'Leary. If he could say hello, wave to everybody. Judge O'Leary, thank you for coming today. And then we have a young lady here from Rochester, New York, which a delegation of about 30 of us went up to Rochester, New York, and Ms. McDade is so kind enough to be here. We actually went up there to learn some best practices. So, Ms. McDade, we are actually trying to get it done. All right. That being said, I'm going to start out once again with this panel with a couple of questions, and then I'll open it up to my colleagues. I know we have a lot of speakers, so I'm going to really try to be that chair and take a page out of some of my colleagues' page and try to move us along. It is Friday afternoon, and it is summer solstice, and everybody's ready to get out. But this is an important issue, and once again, we will have at least 3 more times, as well as other public meetings to really delve into this issue, but we wanted to start doing this today. And this is to the panel, just from me to start off with. I know that there's been a lot of questions about the penalties, and can I get a comment about the penalties? I strongly believe personally that we can withstand any constitutional challenges, but I know that we are looking to make sure that we are on firm, solid legal ground by the time we pass this legislation through the entire committee. But I did want to get a comment from the committee about any questions that people or the broader committee might have about whether or not this can withstand legal challenge. Rachel, would you like to start off with anybody else?
Yeah, through the chair, we are comfortable with the constitutionality of our legislation. Part of the committee process is to review and perhaps make tweaks. if we need to, and we are certainly doing that. But right now, and when it was introduced, we are comfortable with the constitutionality of the legislation as it is.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate that. Any other panel members want to make any comments?
I will make one comment as well, because not only are the council, me, Rachel, the council side, legal team, our legal team, meaning the administration side, legal team has also taken a look and given a vigorous review of the penalties. And also, just as a reminder, the penalties that are proposed for the lead safe certificate are the same penalties that are currently in place for the rental registration, meaning if you fail to register your rental unit. So it's either a misdemeanor in first degree or a minor misdemeanor, a ticket or a violation that's issued. It mirrors the lead safe certificate, failing to have it, it mirrors the rental registration penalties.
Thank you, and I know that we'll have some more rigorous discussion, and I really encourage my colleagues to really take a deep dive into that, because one of the things that I believe it was Councilman Harrison as well as Councilman Conwell, originally we had civil penalties, but we learned some things that we felt that civil penalties were not stringent enough in order to deal with this. That's why we went to the criminal penalties based upon hearing the 33 recommendations we had before. So we're going to really take a deep dive and a hard look at that, because we do want to make sure that we have something that we believe will be strong constitutionally. I did have another question about daycares. I know that there's a lot of people that are asking us why not include daycares. I'm going to ask if Director Gordon or anybody can respond, and any of our attorneys, Rachel Scalise, can answer any questions about why. I know why we believe it's prudent not to have daycares, but can you kind of give us an overview of what you think about why we didn't have any daycares?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm not sure I can answer that last question per se. One of the things we have in all of our research and understanding of this particular issue is they're child care centers, not daycare centers. We take care of the child, not the day. Hopefully Billy is listening somewhere. She's in school as well.
Really on more fears. Language matters, Director.
Language does matter. I apologize, I'm a little under the weather this morning. So there are three types of child care centers. Type A and Type B are in-home. And those, the city of Cleveland has little, if any, authority over. Type A, we have some authority only because it has no more than, it requires a zoning change in the actual home so that it can be zoned as a commercial business. And that is actually the first step in the entire process, which is actually kind of interesting to think about the industry in and of itself. But for that, because of that, there's fire and building permits that are required, and a variety of other rigors that any provider needs to go through, either Type A or Type B, in-home. And the Ohio Department of Job and Family Services, or DJFS, has authority over these types of child care centers, actually over all three, Type A, Type B, and Type C, which are the centers, which are the larger facilities. What we have been working with the Starting Point folks and also other individuals involved with licensing child care centers is how we can make sure that these homes are also checked to make sure that there are no outstanding lead hazard control orders. They've never been associated with a child who has been poisoned, and finding ways that we can actually play a role in this, although we have no authority on these in-home child care centers. Type C are licensed centers that right now fall under Chapter 224, which the city's Cleveland Department of Public Health has some authority on, but those are not in-home child care centers. But we are reviewing that chapter as well and seeing what recommendations are necessary for that. It is written in the code that parents are required to have their children tested and that the child care center does request that information. Because of the rigors of the types of inspections that are done at these centers, there's a lot that goes into making sure that these centers are safe for families. Now we know that there's plenty of work to do here, and there's opportunities for us to work with the state on this issue. But because the city has such minimal authorities when it comes to child care centers, we think that this is something that we would recommend doing separately as we really delve into ways that we can play a role in this. The one thing I will say with the child care centers, especially type Bs, which are less than 6 children, we believe there's about 50% of those are owner occupied and 50% of those are rental situations. So they would fall under the rental registry and they would fall under the rental inspection program. So they would already be on the radar. But now we are also seeing that these, we know where they all are. We know where the licensed ones are. We now know about all the quality indicators and the star ratings that will be actually a really big topic for us to delve into as well. But we need to make sure that we are really integrating our data so that we know that these are on Building and Housing's radar and that they are to make sure that they definitely are for the rental inspection program.
Thank you for that explanation, Director, and I appreciate that. Just for the audience, this is also being recorded by Channel 20, so we will have this on Channel 20 as well, so I wanted to make sure everybody knew that. The last question I have, and this is just something that I will just plant the seed and we'll talk about it as we look forward to potential amendments. I know in Section 240 that we do have language that deals with conflict of interest. However, I am very interested as this council to make sure that we do look at some language around conflict of interest to make sure that the assessors and the landlords that are requiring the assessors to do the assessing don't have a relationship. And Rachel, if you'd like to comment on that, I know we're looking into that as well.
Sure, through the chair, you and I have talked about that, and we are definitely looking into amending the legislation in July to add conflict of interest.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Francine. With that being said, I'm going to turn over questioning to my colleague and my partner who's been my partner through this whole process, Councilman Kerry McCormick, and then Council President Kevin Kelly, and then I'll take questions from the rest of the council.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and appreciate pulling this together today, and want to publicly thank our Chair, Blaine Griffin, for his leadership in this effort, and for taking the punches and keeping the boat above water and moving forward. And also want to recognize, in addition to the administration officials today, our folks in the crowd from the coalition, and really some of our major partners that are here today that have made this happen. Not only to the point we are today, but also, as we all know, this is a long-term proposition. So making sure that we'll continue this work going ahead. To me, through the chair, this is really a culture change issue. This is not a 1-5-year fix. This is not something that we're going to be able to tackle within a short period of time or over a few years. We, in the city of Cleveland, are taking these bold steps to make sure that we're changing the culture in a way that we ensure that healthy homes are the standard for our families and children. And like I said earlier, we are all in as a city council and administration, but it's going to take the entire community. And whether that is from funding sources, community organizing, education in the community, this culture change will only happen if everyone in this room and beyond takes it seriously and commits to it from the second this legislation passes into perpetuity. So again, I want to thank you, Mr. Chair, and our council president, who's been supportive the entire way as well. I have a short list of questions, and then my chair over here, partner in crime, asked a lot of good ones, but just a couple quick clarifications. Through the chair to our attorney, Ms. Scalish, what is the mechanism in which this is reviewed annually? Is that a sunset clause, or what is the legal mechanism?
The legal mechanism is the wording in the ordinance.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's required that on an annual basis, this is reviewed.
I think that might be.
Really?
I don't know.
Blue, okay. And I think the reason, Mr. Chairman, why that's important too is to ensure that on an annual basis, we're not only reviewing the legislation, but the impact of the legislation, the good and potential concerns that may come up with it. So I think that's a really important piece of this. And then through the chair to Director Donald, can you talk a little bit about the difference between the rental registration timing and the lead safe certificate and how those interact with each other?
Yes. To the councilman, through the chair, there had been a lot of discussions about the timing. So for the rental registry, it is a 1-year certification, so to speak. It expires, or we send out invoices March 1st. It expires March 31st, so every year, it's on the same cycle. Well, the issue with the lead safe certificate was we didn't quite want to put it on that same cycle for a variety of reasons. What's being proposed is a rolling schedule, so to speak, over 2 years, for several reasons. To give the community time to figure out what's going on, to give landlords the time to come up with resources, to give our resource fund time to come up with resources, to give the inspectors time to get trained, et cetera. So we didn't want to flood the system with 50,000, 60,000 lead safe certificates at one time. We thought averaging it out over a 2-year time period would be effective. So when you get your lead safe certificate, it will last for 2 years from whatever date you submitted to us, and we issue the lead safe certificate back to you. So unfortunately, the schedules are not, on the same path, the same date. But every landlord should know rental registration is due one time a year, and when you have your lead safe certificate, it's every 2 years.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, the Director, and I assume that will be the part of educational materials for our landlords as we move forward.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Chairman, to Chief Walker Minor, again, thank you for being here. I'm just curious, as a member of the mayor's cabinet, you guys, I would imagine, have reached to many municipalities in the region. Once we get to a point where legislation is passed and there's a system up and running, are there plans in place from the mayor's office to kind of loop in other municipalities, educate the region? Because we know that the city of Cleveland is not the only one with housing that was built before 1978. So from a regional perspective from the cabinet, I wonder if you can put some insight on that.
Sure, to the councilman through the chair, we have not had that conversation per se. The conversation that we've had is one that Director Gordon made reference to, in that we have strong affiliation and partnership with Cuyahoga County Board of Health. And there are representatives from that organization here today. I'm not sure if they're in here, but I saw members of that team in several of the sessions. And so it is something that is on our mind. We don't have anything specific right now in terms of what we're doing with them, but we talk to them. We're in constant conversation with them because we recognize that the entering suburbs face the same challenges that we face. So when you start looking at literally Garfield Heights, Maple Heights, Shaker Heights, Lakewood, all of those, Parma, all of those that really touch the city of Cleveland, they too, because their housing stock is the same age as our housing stock, we recognize that. But again, we talk to our Cuyahoga County partners, not only the Board of Health, but also Matt Carroll. He's been engaged in this work with us and has an eye on this. And so we don't have a plan and a strategy per se, but we have, it's more than casual conversation, but we don't have anything in terms of a plan.
Thank you.
Mr.
Chairman, to the councilman. Also, we work very, very closely with the other, what we call delegated authorities around the state. So there are 13, I believe, other cities that do the same kind of work as the health department here does. And all these cities have expressed their concern about having a secondary prevention model solely, and so they're really looking at how we are doing things here. Additionally, I'm part of a network of big city health departments, and this is a topic, this is not just a Cleveland issue, this is something that a lot of cities are working on, large and small, but the large ones, the legacy cities, have led as a big issue for them, environmental justice, or environmental injustices that we're dealing with now decades, in some cases many, many decades later. So we're all looking at how we can actually do this, what works, what's successful, and so people are looking at it.
Thank you. My final comment, Mr. Chairman, would just be, I appreciate that. I think it's important too when we look at sharing best practices, but also for State Representative Brent here today, and thank you for working on getting a significant multi-million-dollar allocation from the state for this work. Appreciate your efforts on that. And as we coordinate throughout the state, how we can emphasize to our state reps and the governor and the senators about how we bring more resources into this work on a statewide basis, I think this could assist with that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilman Corman. Council President Kelly. And then Councilman Zoll.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you again to everybody who worked hard on this. Having had a front row seat as this was crafted, all my questions have been asked and answered by yourself, Councilman Corman, and the administration, so I will yield. Thank you.
Thank you, Council President. Councilman Zoll. And then Councilman Pearson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for hosting this meeting in this public setting. To those who are gathered here and wondering what is actually going on, this is a committee process, but the council has actually had this piece of legislation for nearly 2 months. We've all had time to, I believe, receive it sometime in early May, so maybe 45 days. We've all had ample time to read it, review it, and have dialogue with our legal counsel. So I just don't want anyone who's gathered here to think that we are seeing this document for the first time. But it's always good to go through the process and ask questions. I've been on city council long enough to see legislation that was actually passed in the early 2000s, and to see that same piece of legislation amended 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 times after. So I know that I have received calls and inquiry as to certain aspects of it. Why doesn't have this element to it? Just know this legislation with the stewardship that will be created by the Let's Safe Advisory Board. We'll constantly be reviewing this and having dialogue and taking input from the community. It doesn't prohibit us at any point in the future for us to make a simple amendment. I will share with those who are in the room who aren't familiar with the legislative process. That's a perfunctory exercise that occurs all the time. And I have never, ever, in my 17 and a half years on city council, seen the will within City Hall from the city administration and from council to move something like this forward. It's gonna happen. It's gonna get enacted. It might not be perfect. It might not be everything that everyone wants in there, but it's gonna be really good. And it's gonna be a starting point. It's not an end point. So what this is, it represents the floor, not the ceiling. I think where we need to do is get into the detail of how do we help people. And I appreciate sitting in the workshop by our colleague from Rochester, who was just talking about simple programs like replacing windows. You know, if you can get under the HUD guidelines and give out up to a $5,000 grant to help people replace windows. So those are the types of creative things that we're going to be working with. We're blessed in the city to have a wonderful network of community development organization. And I will tell you, those individuals who work in the trenches, our code enforcement coordinators, our housing directors, who really are working to help not impact or hurt people, to try to find solutions to create stability and housing stability. We want to bring those types of programs there, so just know that this council stands ready to further examine what other communities are doing, what we can do with the limited resources we have, and I use the word limited. We're never gonna be lead-free, but we certainly can be lead-safe. And so I just want to applaud all the effort that has gone into it. I want to congratulate our chair and our vice chair who've really shepherded this on the legislative side to make this happen. And I look forward to future hearings and taking feedback from the constituency that I represent and hearing their thoughts about how we can make this a better piece of not only legislation, because it's just a printed document, but how we can connect services and programs to people who will be impacted and really try to prevent displacement that certainly can happen as a result of this. So thank you to the administration, to our legal counsel, and I look forward, Mr. Chairman, to future dialogue around this topic.
Mr. Chairman, can I just clarify
Yes.
one thing really quickly through the chair? Council as a whole received the coalition's recommendations at the beginning of May. The actual ordinance was introduced June 3rd.
Thank you. Thank you for all your comments. I have Councilman Anthony Harrison, and then I have Councilman Kevin Conlon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As my colleagues stated, thank you to the administration, thank you to the legislative coalition, my colleagues, and in particular, Councilman Griffin and Councilman Coleman for really working to keep everybody in line and keep us all together on this issue. You know, it's so greatly important to our community. I'd just like to also thank some other members of the community who were part of helping to really move this along. Members of Clash, other members of the community who worked hard on helping to get us to this point as well. Just a few points to the administration and to the chairman. We talked the one thing about conflict of interest, absolutely. He and I had a long discussion, and we thought that was important because one of the worst things that we want is intimidation to be a part of this, right? All my friends is the person who does the testing, so well, my friend is the person who does this, and so it creates an issue, and it creates folks who are not willing to let inspectors in when they know there's an issue, or simply just picking up the phone to make a call and say this is what's going on. So I look forward to that being part of this because that is going to be a great addition to this legislation. So as it relates to the lead-safe certificate, and to the director, through the chair to the director, you mentioned that it was every 2 years the certificate will be provided, right?
Through the chair to the council, yes.
Okay, so every 2 years, but is that as long as the unit stays under the same ownership, or if the unit changes, have you thought about if the unit changes that it would require them to go back and make sure that they have an updated lead safe certificate?
That has to, through the chair to the council, yes, that was something that was considered, that was actually considered at the policy committee level as well. And the recommendation came forth from the policy committee that the lead safe certificate went with the property, not with the owner, but the rental registration goes with the owner and not with the property. So every time an owner changes, there's an expectation to re-register the rental property because of course the ownership contact information is going to change. So that will change, but the status of the unit in general, no. As far as the lead safe certificate, it goes with the property and not with the owner.
Sure, and I thank you for that. And my thought of that is just because if you have one owner who's more active and who's more about keeping up the condition of the property, right? And they do the work that they have to do to make it lead safe. Maybe some of the basic things to make it safe. You know, painting over areas of paint that is peeled off of the wall, etc., or drywall that is paint that's come off the wall of some sort. And painted, right? Painted, it looks good for now, it makes it safe for now. But in a year's time, after you have kids in the house or other folks who are moving around and you leak something, you move something, so then the paint is exposed again, chips are on the floor. And my thought is that if a property, is sales, and although that the owner is different, but the property is still what it is, right? Then we go back to that property before it is allowed to transfer, or that's have to be part of this disclosure. However that process, I don't know today what that looks like, but maybe thinking about, looking at revisiting that discussion whether that makes sense to do that. I just, there's always gonna be some landlords or some property owners that are a bit more engaged than others.
And just to respond to that, so to be clear, the certificate of disclosure, so in general, the city of Cleveland, we do not have a point of sale inspection. So to be able to enforce every time a property transfers from one owner to another for a rental, is a little bit hard to keep track of, not saying impossible, but hard. But also keep in mind that the 2 years is not arbitrary, it was not arbitrarily picked, it's the industry standard that, the lead status of a property is said to be, it's not the same, but lead safe for 2 years when it's certified by a land risk assessor or a clearance technician. So that 2 years, in general, anything can happen even with the same owner in 2 years. But part of this process as well, just to clarify, is not just to get people to pay for a lead risk assessment or a clearance test to have a property be lead safe. It's also changing the practices of people. That's landlord and tenants to inform and educate people about interim controls, about if you just scuff a wall and there's chipping or peeling paint, how to fix that situation. So it's not just the burden or onus to say, go get a report. This is gonna be a whole change of how people think. And yeah, it's absolutely a culture shift, of how people think and treat their rental properties and how tenants as well can take simple measures as far as cleaning, dusting, et cetera, to lessen the effect of lead in the property.
Sure. I appreciate that, that response. I can understand your point when you go with that. So as we move along, I will, Mr. Chairman, we can just continue that discussion and figure out if there's something there that we can use. I see it all the time in my mortgage folks do what they have to do. They repair a window, they paint over a threshold, and then a couple of months or years, it's back to the same condition. So we'll move on for now. Mr. Chairman, if I can, my second point, we talked about the difficulty in the child care centers, make sure I don't say daycare. The child care centers and not adding to this ordinance here, have we thought about, you mentioned that because we know where the type B home daycare, home child cares, and some of the other child cares are located within the city limits, have we thought about for those units who we know that operate a child care, that they go through, as we do the rental inspection, we do the other inspections, that we do that maybe annually in a way to, since we don't have full jurisdiction over the centers and licensing, that we put, make their inspections on an annual basis because we know it's a child care center, it's operational. Have you considered that, thought about that idea in the chair, administration?
Mr. Chairman, to the council, it's my understanding that Invest in Children is planning to come and talk to the policy committee in the next couple weeks or months to talk through a number of these potential ideas. I think that because the city of Cleveland doesn't have authority, Ohio Department of Jobs and Family Services does, both county and the state, and I think that they need to be present to really lay out how that entire process works, how their inspection process works, how their licensing process works, and I think we need to figure out a way there that there is some role that inspections for for the presence of lead, for the inspection process that can satisfy this. But I would really recommend having them be a big part of this as well, because it is a very rigorous process, although we're all very clear that it is not, they don't specifically do a lead clearance exam within those properties.
And I'm going to ask if we could, on Councilman Harrison's point, Ms. Tilley, if you can note that, and we'll bring that up to the policy committee, because I know that they're going to have a further discussion about that, and then they'll also be up in a moment again, so we'll follow up with that, Councilman.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you for that, and I appreciate the response. But I look at it as a very doing rental inspections, you know, we know that, you know, it's a rental unit that this child is operating not at home, right? That we make their inspection.
Possibly.
Hey,
So, Mr. Chairman.
If through the chair, if we could.
And Mr. Chairman, to the councilman, possibly.
And through the chair to the councilman, so it's my understanding, and Director Gordon, you can correct me, I believe type B homes, there's only 200, let's say 200, registered units.
Yeah.
And for type A, I believe there may be 9. So we're talking about a universe of 200, let's just say 10 properties. Based on the statistics, maybe half of those are rental units, so that's about 100 rental units. So you also think about my jurisdiction to inspect properties are based on if it's a rental unit or not. So whether or not that would be something that would have to be further discussed and further legislated, if there's a different level of stringency that's put towards childcare. Sorry, it's okay. Childcare units that are rentals versus another rental, and if that would be some type of enforcement that is targeted enforcement because it's a childcare instead of just a rental unit, since my authority is coming from rental units and not it being a childcare, right? So there are different, absolutely, I think it's a consideration. I think it's something that the policy committee has other people that we should talk about. And I know that we have it on the parking lot for the policy committee. It's just daycares in general to further flesh out. Excuse me, childcare.
Mr. Chairman, just to, so there are 9 type A's, that is, allows up to 12 children, and there are 280 type B's, in the city of Cleveland, and they can have no more than 6 children in the home.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll move on from this point. Here in administration, so listen, we think possibly there's something there that we can further discuss things. I just see it as a way that's something that we can quickly do, versus, waiting to have a discussion with Mr. Chairman, Sergeant, and whoever else. I just figured that was a way for us to, with our ability, to do something like that. But I'll get at that point. I'll have further questions on this.
Thank you, Councilman Harrison. I have Councilman Conwell and Councilman Brinkenshire.
Thank you very, very much.
Take us on. Yeah. Right on. Systems. We're discussing systems and structures. That means a lot to me. I mean, you could pass legislation through the chair, and it's about management. Number one, you mentioned that it says director here in section 365.05. The director is who? Building and housing? Are we talking about health director? Are we talking about plural directors?
Through the chair, in 365.05, that is the director of building and housing.
Director of building and housing. Now, through the chair, as well as the chair. So when we start the systems, and we start creating structures, that will start when? 1st of January, if the legislation is passed.
Ms. Galish, could you explain that? But it's actually not until March 2 of 2021. But they're ramping up systems now.
Right.
The ramp up is.
Could you, the Director Dunn, and also Ms. Galish? Both.
Through the chair to the councilman. So I can say that once we have been discussing the ordinance with Rachel and the team, and after it was introduced, I've already internally started having meetings to discuss systems. So discuss software upgrades, to discuss people issues, to discuss any reworkings of my department, to discuss, potentially, I hate to say that word when it is equated back to my department, but deficiencies that would not be able to support right now that we have in place, like my systems that I have in place now that are not able to support this. So January 1st, I can't say that January 1st we will have all systems in place for the March 1st, 2021 rollout, but absolutely before then, because I anticipate people will, even though March 1st, 2021 is the first date that will require a lead safe certificate, so I'm gonna guess people are gonna do it earlier than that. So there will absolutely be a staffing change. I mean, you name it, there's gonna be some reworking there. So once I, put that together, and review that with the administration to see what changes will be made and what's gonna be best to implement this program.
Right, and then you'll, through the chair, then you'll come back to council to show us how the risk assessment looks. See, you have it on paper, but I don't know how you evaluate it. And you said you're gonna reevaluate, and to look at if there's any chinks in the armor, whatever the case may be. You should bring back your process analysis to us, through the chair.
Well, yes, and through the chair to the councilman, I'll leave that up to the chair for, to call hearings, just as I can imagine Councilman Brancatelli did for DPS with the rental inspection unit. When you guys wanted an update or he wanted an update, you just call us back and let us know that, I'll let you know the status and progress. That's with any of us. That will absolutely be embedded in the process, but I'll leave that to Councilman Griffin to figure out when that happens.
So through the chair, you think you'll be finished with the systems by the 1st of January?
No, I did not.
I'm
Through
asking
the
a
chair.
question. That's
No,
actually-
through the chair to the councilman. No, I don't expect by the 1st of January of 2020 to be finished with the system, because quite frankly, if I think that I'm gonna hire potentially new staff, it takes a while to hire new staff, so I can't imagine that I'm gonna have a fully functioning,
Good question.
purpose. I'm absolutely guessing that there will be systems changes with my software program. Excel is what we use. Who knows if there will be something else added to that, et cetera. Because I'm thinking of innovative ways to think about the lead risk assessment that you mentioned.
Yeah.
Well, what a lead risk assessment looks like, I'm sure probably almost everybody at the table can pull up something, but we're thinking about standardizing the forms and make something really simple for a clearance exam or a lead risk assessment. So when people in the community, practitioners submit it to us, they kind of make it look the same or similar. So when it gets to us, it's easy for us to review and people understand, what is expected of them. So there's a lot of work. So I can answer that wholeheartedly, no, January 1st, all the systems will not be in place, but I can say that by then, absolutely, we should have a plan in place to get us to where we need to be.
All right, you have a project team also through the chair, is that correct? Because it can't just be you need some of the experts to help us out with this.
Through the chair to the councilman, absolutely. I have my team, which a couple people are in the room today, Commissioner Vanover and Michael Banks. He's essentially one of the Excel gurus for the whole city. And this is part of the crew that we've already started talking. I mean, I have a records administrator because the lead safe certificate is a record that we're gonna have to keep. That's gonna have to be uploaded. All the assessments and tests that come in. Well, I hope to have a system that can take all of the data, but be uploaded and be accessible to anyone that wants, to have it there. So I have to look about all these data issues. There are issues here, but I do have absolutely a team around me, and we can make it, and we'll make it happen.
You're very smart. You know what, to the chair. I like what I see for me, but I like outcome measures, and I like goals and objectives. And I like when you mentioned reevaluation. And you have to manage policy. You can pass legislation, but if you don't manage it, the outcome measures, it means nothing to me. So if we can come back and, I don't know when, maybe 3 months or 6 months, so we can look at what's going on, that means something to me. The council can reevaluate. And that's where I'm at.
Okay. Mr. Councilman Conwell, point taken. I will tell you that one of the committees that's going to be announced today is to deal strictly with measuring and it's dealing strictly with policy. And that's one of the things that the Librado Lead Safe Coalition is going to be working with us on too. So I hear your point. We'll make sure that we bring that group in front of us and tell us where we're at, okay?
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Conwell, for your question. Councilman Brancatelli, then Councilman Solicic, and then we're going to bring up the policy committee from the Lead Safe People Corps. Councilman Brancatelli.
Great, thank you very much. Couple of quick questions and a couple clarifications. Through the chair, Director Donald, you talked about the normal inspections already being done. You've tested about 1,600 for lead. What percentage of those came back positive?
Through the chair to the
Second,
council,
right,
percent, yeah, percentage.
Right.
No, I have the number, I don't have the percentage, so out of
What's
those,
what's the number? It's,
133 have tested positive, meaning there's a lead hazard. So also keep in mind the test that we're doing, so there are levels. Lead risk assessments, up there at the top, you have clearance examination somewhere in the middle. What the Department of Building and Housing, our inspectors are doing, who are our certified lead risk assessors, they're doing a lead dust wipe test. So we've conducted 1,627 tests, and 133 of those, which is about 8%.
and I forget right now, how many thousands have you inspected overall so far?
Approximately 13,519 units since 2017. And keep in mind, we really started inspecting,
It was like,
interior inspection started October 2017, so it wasn't the full year.
And right now, we're all doing the voluntary compliance ones, the ones we're letting us in and, or cooperating with, allowing us in.
Through the chairs of the councilman, yes, but a caveat. So in the sense of landlords and tenants can allow us to go into the property. So we're doing the systematic inspections of rental properties. And we also inspect rental properties based on complaints. Generally, of course, a complaint is going to be a tenant. But it's either one of those. And then we do have a small amount of inspections that come over from housing court. So we have court-ordered inspections. And so depending on where they fall, some of those could fall into our rental inspection unit, and some may just be a area inspector that does those.
And the chair, for the past year or so, how many units of housing have we rehabbed that you have had permits? I think because the number of apartments being done, so all the various programs, rough estimate?
I don't know the number through the chair to the council. I don't have that number off the top of my head.
So if at least 500 houses, I think we've had some program go through either affordable home, take advantage of any of our number of programs. And what I often brag about the city of Cleveland, since the Jackson administration, we've been averaging about $1 billion in permits through your department, which is an incredible amount. Over the last 12 years, that's a tremendous investment in our city. But the mayor stopped me today and asked me a question I couldn't answer. For the houses that we rehab, we don't ask for sweat tests or clearance on houses that we're involved with.
Sure.
And through the chair to the councilman, when you mean we are involved with, you mean through community
So,
development?
through community development.
No, through the chair to the councilman, yes, I do believe that all community development dollars, those projects receive some type of lead, and I don't know. Yes, so. Every
And
property
we
will
have
receive.
Ms. Jackson, is
Commissioner,
Commissioner.
come on up.
I apologize for putting you on the spot. I'm sure she knows the answer.
Thanks for joining us, Commissioner Louise Jackson.
To the chair, to the councilman, every project that receives federal funding through community development either has a risk assessment or a lead clearance.
Thank you, Commissioner.
So do we know how many of those we've done? Roughly?
To the chair, to the councilman, I do not have that number, I could get that number.
If we can follow up and make sure we get that number, and Ms. Tilly would distribute it.
Great, thank you. And part of the questioning, Chairman, is getting at the volume of work we're already doing. So we are providing a lot of service, and I know there was a question, there was that example of Rochester lowering their level of 85% over the past 10 years. And we talked about what we've been doing for the past 10 years, and I think the number is a little over 15,000 units of demolition over the last 10 years, which is a tremendous accomplishment of getting rid of a lot of the most hazardous, problematic properties. Those properties that are demolished or condemned and are already environmentally toxic properties. At the same time, how many houses that have been renovated? I know that the county land bank has turned over 2,000 properties that have been reinvested in on top of what we're already doing through the commissioner's office. So there are a significant number of investments being made already. So as we continue to ramp up the change, I think it's going to happen exponentially with all the other work that's being done. As our markets improve, you're going to see that number change quickly, hopefully. Just to sidetrack a little bit, Mr. Chairman, to our counselor. We are only looking at rental units. Was there a specific reason why we only looked at rental and not the universe of properties?
Great question.
Ms. Gates?
Well, rental units, we already have rental registration, so that is helpful. Also, how people that own homes, homeowners, that falls more under state law right now. We can't get to that. I'm sorry. The home ownership is more state law. That's and this is a big enough fight for the city.
And along the same discussion to the Director Donald, we're talking about amending our rental registration forms to include disclosure of safe, that is lead safe, or disclosure if there's any outstanding violations.
To the chair, Councilman, so for the certificate of disclosure, keep in mind, we, the Department of Building and Housing, provide that record. So we will internally look at our records via, when I say our, I mean the city of Cleveland. We look at the health structure record, and we'll look at our internal, if we've issued a lead violation or not. And additionally, if the property has been certified as lead safe, et cetera, and disclose that on the certificate of disclosure. For the rental registration, that once again will be our internal record. So no, I'm not looking for the landlord to tell me that his property is safe because whether I have certified it is safe or not.
Okay.
So on the rental registration, there will be a check or I don't know, we haven't quite figured that out. But yes, there will be a way to indicate whether or not that property has been certified as lead safe.
Okay, great. And I think this will probably be Rachel's question. Under the legislation, it talks about creating this advisory board with 6 appointments for the mayor and 1 for council. And then within that subsection, it's 2 from the Lead Safe Coalition, 1 from the Lead Safe, 1 as a Lead Safe auditor, and 1 from K-Board. Were those recommendations from the broader committee that were specific, or how did we end up with that mix?
That was a discussion we had internally.
Okay, because one of the areas, I mean, we have K-Board on here, but I would also look at, as we go through this, and how do we include landlords in this discussion outside of K-Board, but try to figure out how we broaden that to get other partners in there that can have a engagement of those work and practice.
Through the chair, we could definitely take a look at that and amend the legislation to add landlords.
Great, thank you. And this is my, just for clarification purposes, Mr. Chairman, the differences on a clearance technician, a lead inspector, and a lead risk assessor. There are 3 separate classifications.
Under state law, yes.
Okay, and can someone define a little bit, or is one of those elevator speeches you can give on what each one of those are?
Commissioner?
I'll shoot back in the hot seat.
To the chair, to the councilman, a lead risk assessor is an individual that is licensed by the state of Ohio to do a paint inspection and an abatement plan as to how the lead hazards will be addressed. They could be either interim controls or abatement measures. That's a lead risk assessor, and that person can also do a clearance. A clearance which is taking the dust wipes in various places within a property, and we send them off to a certified approved lab for analysis. A lead clearance technician is a person that can actually take dust wipes and then they send them off for analysis and create a report. And the other discipline was?
A lead inspector.
A lead inspector is a person that goes in and just does a lead inspection of the various surfaces.
So all of them have the ability to sign off on a clearance exam?
The clearance technician and the lead risk assessor.
And this is an area that to the chairman, that will, I think we'll have to have a little bit more deeper dive. The concern, a lot of the concerns that were raised were, we talk about workforce development is, we frankly just don't have enough of those in this profession right now, that as we open up the floodgates to say, we have thousands of houses to inspect. I don't know that, I think the last list only had like 35 of the lead risk assessors and clearance technicians. Do we have a list of the number, or maximum number?
Commissioner, do you, or your panel members on that?
To the chair, to the councilman, I do not have a list of clearance technicians within the state of Ohio. That information is, you can obtain it from the state of Ohio's website.
Well, I know one of the, Councilman, one of the major parts of the role ramp-up period with the coalition is onboarding and training those those staff.
We'll do the next team. Next team of folks that are up there. But, and I think that's just an important point we want to make, and to have this out time to be to have these clearance tests done is to make sure you have appropriate workforce, and that's to try to get in front of that. On the certification, and I think Rachel was next year, we said these clearance exams are valid for 2 years. How did, that was part of a committee recommendation?
That's the industry standard.
Industry standard?
Yes.
In some cities, it's been a longer period of time, but I read somewhere that houses that aren't like typical high-risk houses, they've been able to get a longer period of time being valid.
Through the chair, I can't speak to that.
Okay. I like this. Look, I mean, it's clearly we're going after the hardest hit zip codes first, and we're trying to figure that out and look at the highest risk houses, but just trying to figure out how do we deal with houses that have gone through gut renovations and
well, there is an exception in our law that anything that has gone through an abatement in the previous 20 years does not have to have a lead risk assessment or clearance examination. They're exempt from that. Lasts for 20 years, which is what permanent is in the state.
So if it's at a gut rehab, it does not have to have a clearance exam?
That's correct.
Okay. So and can you define that a little more, maybe Dr. Donald?
You want a definition of gut rehab?
Right.
Yeah.
So our exemption says this: to be exempt from the lead safe certification requirement, the owner has to submit a copy of what's called a comprehensive lead risk assessment and paint inspection report. And that's issued by a lead risk assessor, and that verifies that the unit has been abated of lead hazards in accordance with the state law and the federal law. And the report has to have been completed within 20 years prior to the date they are submitting it to the director.
So we'll, as I look under the state law, I'm trying to find out a little bit more later on and track that down. On the rental registration side, one of the things we're updating is on the corporations and the being able to identify agents. And so we're going to continue down that path of making sure for LLCs, it's an important point of, especially out of town LLCs, identifying local agents and responsible parties.
Yes, Chair Hoffman, yes. And we actually have been internally just discussing different measures and stopgaps to prevent people from registering the property if they don't have the required information, such as a person in Cuyahoga County as your contact, if you're out of state or out of county, even landlord, or making sure that email addresses and telephone numbers are present. The interesting part is just, there's fine nuances to this. So keep in mind that most people that already have registered, let's say they've registered for the past 3 years, they get an invoice in the mail that's essentially a coupon that with a barcode at the bottom. They just detach that coupon, mail in their check, and it goes to a lockbox. in Key Bank, it just gets processed. So we're trying to work through ways for that situation because there's no stopgap there. They're not going online. There's not a computer screen that can say, flash, stop, you haven't put in the right information, and you're not walking in person to register. You're just doing it through a third-party entity, so that creates some issues. But yes, we are absolutely trying to clean up our historic, our old, current rental registration data, and then putting measures in place software-wise to make sure that this issue doesn't perpetuate.
Great, and I'll wrap up real quick because I know we have other folks that can get on, and it's almost happy hour.
You're over 15 minutes.
Did we have a schedule of the fee structures and what other municipalities are charging for the rental registration fee? I mean, doubling the fee just seems like a big fee.
Through the chair to the councilman, I can say that a couple of years ago, we did pull something together when we were looking at best practices before we started the rental inspection unit to determine what other commonly situated municipalities and cities were charging. And I can say that we were at the bottom of most everybody that we looked at. So I can probably quickly pull that together and send it over to the chair to disseminate, to compare what other cities, also I think the chart may have had what other cities' services they provided and the fee that they attached with their rental registration.
Okay. Yeah, we can work on that and get a schedule of what other municipalities, especially similar municipalities as ours. And I was also looking at the cap, and we can look at that as well. I'll yield the floor. Thank you.
All right, I have, this is what we're gonna do. I have one more line of questioning from Councilman Pelisi. And then I do want to bring up, we have our partners from the Let's Safe Cleveland Coalition, and then we also have some community testimony. But here's what we're going to do, because this is the first step, the initial hearing, as Councilman Zone said, we've had this legislation for a while. We're going to take the step of giving, because we have a quorum, to have a first bite at the apple for the vote to start off with, and then we're going to bring up the community because I did commit to some of the community folks that they will be able to testify today as well. Okay, so that being said, we have Councilman Pelisi, and then we'll take a motion. Councilman Pelisi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, my honorable colleagues, and to the audience. First of all, I want to thank the chairperson, Ken Griffin, Councilman McCormick, Councilman Frank Teller, Council President, and all members who've been involved in this process. And I appreciate the chair for constantly updating me and questions that I've had that you can answer. I also want to thank the Let's Safe Coalition, Flash, and Rachel Dizzle from the PD and other reporters who really have highlighted the problem that we have with the greater Cleveland area. It's, I think, a combination of everybody involved that really brought this to the head, and I want to thank the administration as well for their active participation in this process. My question is, and some of my colleagues briefly touched on it, but is implementation mechanics. I've been in council long enough to know that the codified ordinances, the printed codified ordinance is about 6 inches thick. And so council does not hire, we don't fire, we don't deploy. We do not enact the proper administrative procedures. We don't administer. So I'm looking to the administration. So we have approximately, as we're being told, about 2 years to put in effect the different internal mechanisms and mechanics to implement this process. So to me, that's something that I'm going to be looking at very closely is the mechanics of how we're going to implement this, because one of the ongoing concerns that many of us have had over the years is that council can pass whatever we want, but it's up to the administration to enforce. And when we see the breakdown over the years, it's because we don't see the enforcement or we don't have the people in place to do the enforcement. So it's very critical that the administration understands the importance of ramping up and putting in place the people that need to implement the new procedures and processes that are going to be passed by this council at some point. My other question is this, and my other statement is this. At this point, we have approximately how many housing units in the city of Cleveland? Rental units? Whoever.
Through the chair, through Councilman, based on, we long thought it was around 84,000 units, but based on updated information from Case Western Reserve University, they've been working hard with the Let's Say Coalition. I think they're projecting 96,000 units. But they're still working on numbers.
And then total units, both rental and occupied in the city. I've been told about 140, is that correct? About 140,000 units.
Through the chair to the councilman, I can't confirm that, it may be a little more, but let's say 140.
Okay.
Can we get a follow-up with that with Ms. Tilly so we can send it out to the committee?
Okay. So as we look at the overall picture, we know this piece of legislation is directed at rental units. But when I received, as all members did, notification from health as to properties that were placarded, where they were stapled, the placard was put on the unit. When I went out to look at one of those structures, and I got out of my car and I stood there and I said this exactly to the governor, face to face, when I had an opportunity to talk with him recently. The mayor heard this as well. I stood on the front sidewalk looking at the house that had been placarded. It was an owner-occupied house by a single mom with 2 or 3 children. I can't remember exactly how many children. There was a blue tarp on the roof. The paint was peeling off the house. The front porch was leaning. The front steps looked like you were afraid to walk up them. And the windows looked like they were from the 1920s when the house was built. In fact, the glazing of the windows was falling out. And we know in glazing there's lead and in some cases asbestos. So as I looked there, what it symbolized to me, not only was there a lead issue in this home, but the overall condition of the housing stock in the city of Cleveland. It hits you right in the face. You couldn't deny the situation. So as I'm looking to the administration and also within the body, we have got to collectively figure. It's one thing to go out and cite that homeowner or that landlord for the condition, the lead condition. But what are we collectively going to do to address the overall condition of that house? So when we look at programs, this is a unique opportunity now because of the Let's Say Coalition and others to really look, and I know Commissioner Jackson works on this every day, to figure out what we are going to collectively do to put forth some meaningful, really meaningful and hard-hitting and pointed housing rehabilitation programs in this city or program to address the housing stock. I've been talking to a lot of people who remind me, contractors, that Cleveland, unlike other cities, there's a reason why it's called the Forest City, because most of the homes are built out of wood because of the proximity of forests, of lumber yards, of being on Great Lakes, whereas Chicago, Pittsburgh, Baltimore, I can go down to the track here. Most of those structures are brick. The houses are brick, the structures are brick or stone. So regardless of how well you take care of a home, once it exceeds or gets close to 100 years of age, you've got issues, just as anyone who's 100 years of age has issues. So we have got to figure out, again, through this program, and maybe this is the door that kicks it open, not only to address lead issues, but how do we get that mom? Because you can repair her windows, and that's the other thing I'm told by some contractors, that on an old home, there's approximately 18 windows that need to be replaced. And that we've heard again today, and I want to really, I was really enlightened and educated by the presentation this morning by Dr. Atisha and others. I mean, just to give you the historical perspective and where we're at, what we need to do. To replace the windows in that lady's house wasn't going to do it because her roof is leaking. Her front porch is ready to fall off, and her paint was virtually non-existent on the outside of that house. So I'm going to be looking to the administration, my colleagues, and to the Let's Say Coalition is how do we collectively put together a program that we can implement on March 1st, 2021 to address that mom's house, to address the other homes. And I'm also reminded, I've only had one landlord call me, but I'm reminded by the landlord who did call me. He reminded me, because I know him pretty well. He said, you know, he referred to himself as a low-income landlord. He said, I don't live in Gates Mills. I live right here in the neighborhood. And two of the houses I have, I inherited them from family members. I'm not a wealthy man. I'm doing my best to maintain these structures. So it ties in again. How do we help that landlord who wants to be responsible but doesn't have the financial wherewithal to address that home? So, Mr. Chairman, my own colleagues, I've seen a lot of those movies, and when I ride the city and I look at the condition of our housing stock at present, I'm greatly alarmed and concerned because it's not going in the direction that it needs to go. And it's because people are financially strapped, they're on fixed incomes, they're elderly, they're working poor. And so I can relate to my mother who raised four of us by herself. And when I was listening to the presentation this morning, it really hit home how many times did she have myself and my two sisters out there scraping the paint, the peeling paint. They were on the ground reaching as high as they could. Yours surely had to go up the ladder. But when I think of all that paint that we would scrape and fall down along the side of that house, and what did we do? We turned the dirt over on the lead paint. You probably could run an F-18 off of what we put in that ground today. Because I ride past the house all the time. But that's how you did it in the day. We scraped it and then we primered it with lead primer. And we did our best to maintain Mom's house as best as we could. But those are the challenges. Low-income families cannot maintain their homes anymore. So lead is a big problem. I represent one of the precincts in Glenville, the smallest area of Glenville. But with the redistricting, I realized that Glenville has a tremendous lead problem, tremendous lead poisoning problem in the Glenville community. I saw it at the recent report that CMSD did with regard to the schools, the percentage of students that have lead within the system. I too believe that as a result of lead contamination, it is affecting the behavior of young people. It's affecting criminal behavior as well. So this is an issue that's of paramount importance. Again, I want to thank the administration, my colleagues, the chairman of this committee, and Commissioner Jackson has been around a long time. I can remember when we had a program where you could seek city assistance to improve your property. You would get us, what I don't know if we refer to as a second mortgage, and then it was payable when you passed on or you transferred the house. You didn't have to pay back the loan until that point.
To the chair, to the councilman, yes, we have a version of that program now, and to address some of your concerns, we are working with my director to put programs in place that will address the actual state of the house. The lead program does not cover everything that needs to happen. We actually did a presentation to City Council to show some of the things that we run into. So we have worked very hard over the last year to actually add more funds to doing some of the projects, but it is a huge task.
And so we are, and I'm glad to hear that I was aware of it, we're going to have to figure out how to add some significant dollars to that if we really want to address the issue. If we really want to address the housing stock, I think the council president did it this morning when I sat there listening to the opening remarks. He said, so often we define, please correct me if I'm wrong, we define our city by buildings and by sports teams. We have to do things differently. We have to define our city by the quality of life that our citizens have. That's how we really define our city. It's not whether the guys on the basketball team are playing glitzy place, it's how our kids are living, how our citizens are living. So I'm looking forward to this whole process. This is a unique opportunity, probably in my time in council, this might be the best time ever to address the housing condition in this city. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilman Pulaski. You illustrated a lot for everybody doing this. So I really appreciate your comments. As I stated earlier, since the administration, as well as our attorney explained the legislation, I'm going to ask for a motion to vote on this. And I have a motion.
Mr. Chair, I move to. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move to pass ordinance 747, 2019, and 748, 2019 out of the Health and Human Services Committee.
Any discussion?
Good second?
Yes.
So, it's been moved in second, just a comment. Again, this is gonna go through 3 full committee hearings. This is gonna move on to a committee on July 23rd with the Development, Planning, and Sustainability Committee, and then to the Committee of the Whole on July 24th. For all of the hundreds of hours that have been put into the recommendations, to the hundreds of hours of our staff in crafting the ordinance, and to the tremendous amount of work and the listening tours that are happening right now in the communities. I wholeheartedly support passage out of this committee.
Thank you, Councilman Zone. I really appreciate that, and well said, eloquently put. There has been a lot of time. This has not been done in a vacuum. This has had a lot of community buy-in, and we are going to have more time to review this, as well as any amendments that will be made by the July vote. That being said, all in favor? Aye. Aye. Any opposed? Yes. Ordinance number 747. Ordinance 747 and 748, 2019. I'm going to bring up, we're going to continue to have community comment. So I am going to bring up our legislative coalition. Thank you to the administration and our attorneys. Thank you for everybody else. I do know I have a couple of council persons that are on the way out of town, so they've graciously stayed with us. And I know that we may have a couple of council people that may leave, but anybody that can stay, I appreciate it, because this team has been working very closely with us. And just want to hear their thoughts on our legislation.
Mr. Chairman, go. I was thinking on July 16th. Are we may do this?
Thank you. All right, we have with us, and I know we have, now we're dealing with a timeline of trying to make sure we stay in line with the orchestrators of the Land Safe Summit. So I do want to make sure that we give adequate time to hear from Mr. Mark McDermott. And first of all, I want to commend Mr. McDermott. He took on the enviable task of leading the Land Safe Coalition policy team, which means that he was the traffic cop at the intersection of all of the ideas. So thank you. And I also know that you are fighting the summer flu. So thank you for coming out today to be a part of us. But Mr. McDermott, if you can announce your entire team, I appreciate it, and then we'll hear testimony from you, and then we'll probably report. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, very much. Appreciate the kind words. That you know, the work was the work of over 70 people involved. So really appreciate it. We have with us today 3 folks that you've heard from before, myself, and also, I'm sorry, we have 2 new folks who we'd really like to hear from. To my left, Scott Crowley, who's a very active landlord in the community, and Donnie Brissett, who is a person who's had led directly impact his family, in addition to Kim Foreman and Abby Siegel, who's with us today also. And I do ask the chair what order you'd like us to go in, actually.
I would like to actually hear from the landlord and also Mr. Brissett, as somebody who's been affected by it, and also as a landlord. We'll hear brief comments from them, and then we want to hear your thoughts on the legislation, because we consider you a true partner and want to make sure we get the so, Mr. Crowley, I believe, and then Mr. Brissett.
Chairman Griffin, members of council, thank you for having me here today. It is an honor to be here, as it has been an honor to have the opportunity to participate in the incredible efforts of the Lead Safe Cleveland Coalition, CLASH, and this body to address this problem. My name is Scott Crayley. I'm a landlord on the West Side, and I'm here today to urge you to pass this legislation as a critical first step in the fight against lead poisoning in Cleveland. I currently have 16 occupied rental units. Of those, 9 tenants are families with a total of 23 children. Including my own 2 children, that's 25 Cleveland youth whose lead safety I am at least partially responsible for. Since first attending an RRP training about 4 years ago, I've been acutely aware of lead hazards in my homes and have done what I can to mitigate them. The houses are duplexes and singles, and most are around 100 years old. I presume there to be lead paint in all of them. At move-in, I walk each tenant through the house and identify areas of concern like windowsills and exterior paint. I educate them about best practices for lead safety, and I ask them to inform me promptly of any flaking paint or other hazards. I've been gradually replacing wood windows and siding with vinyl, and I periodically inspect each unit thoroughly to identify dangers. I have tried to work with contractors who are trained and willing to utilize lead-safe practices, but this can be challenging. I'm invested in landlording not only as an entrepreneur, but as a community member. I recognize the severe shortage of quality housing for lower-income Clevelanders, and I work to find a responsible balance between quality and affordability so as to best serve that demographic. That said, speaking strictly as a landlord, a house is a business. There's money in and money out, and my job is to maximize my return. As things currently stand, I may choose to remediate lead hazards, or I may not. I may choose to keep my tenants informed, or I may not. I may choose to carry the responsibility of protecting those 25 children on my shoulders, or I may not. But a house is not a business. It's a home. It's the foundation upon which a person builds everything else in their life. Employment, education, health, wealth, community, and family. All of these depend on the safety and stability of the house a person lives in. And a house that can poison your children is no foundation upon which to build a life. Lead poisoning is an economic issue, but it is also a moral issue. We have the moral imperative to ensure that these children are protected, whether or not I personally have the know-how or the resources or even the basic inclination to do so. With a child's life on the line, we cannot afford to allow these critical decisions to depend on the voluntary goodwill of a given landlord. I am well aware that this process will not be easy or cheap. At $250 for a clearance exam, I'm looking at $2,000 a year in additional expenses. Add to that the time it takes to coordinate with tenants and inspectors, and the cost of any remediation or interim controls, which could run into the thousands. As a business owner, I could tally these bills and protest. I could express resentment at burdensome regulation, and I could object to government intrusion into what I believe to be my personal affairs. But as a citizen, I say again, we have a moral imperative. The decision to protect our children from a lifetime of consequences is not and cannot be made as a business decision. Property taxes, water bills, the basic structural integrity of the dwelling, all of these are normal costs of doing business. Lead safety must be one of these. And as a business owner, I look forward to this legislation. I look forward to the knowledge and expertise that we can develop to collectively solve this problem. I look forward to the resources, financial and otherwise, that I will be able to lean on to make my houses safer. I look forward to utilizing the skilled workforce that can be developed as a part of this project. Most of all, I look forward to sharing the incredible responsibility of those 25 children's futures with everyone here. As a business owner, this is not the easy thing to do, but it is the right thing to do, and I'm ready to do my part. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Grissett? I would like, if I could, to go to Florida, and my colleague, Councilman Zone, just is actually one of Ward 15's clients. So, Councilman Zone.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's always good to have community members come and testify. So I appreciate Scott. You do a wonderful job. I can attest to him and his wife, Anna, who's both very ingrained and involved in our community and doing the right things. And, we need more responsible landlords like Scott and head of real estate, because to be a landlord, it's not a right, it's a privilege. with that privilege comes tremendous responsibility, and I think you heard that illustrated by Scott's testimony, so thanks for being here.
I agree. Thank you, Scott. You showed tremendous insight and caring for our community for speaking out. This young man I've been known since I had hair before. I call him Brother Donnie, but Mr. Brissett, yeah, sure.
Yes, my name is Donnie Brissett. I'm a landlord, parent of lead poisoned children, and a contractor. And how I came about this situation is my daughter and my son had lead poison. And with them having lead poison, I purchased a house from an organization. And once I purchased that house, I found out later on, because I started to see the children acting kind of erratic and started to notice things, so we started taking them to the doctor. And in the process of taking them to the doctor, we started to find out that they had elevated blood levels. And with that, we started going, and we started getting in touch with different people in the neighborhood, organizations who was to help us fix the houses. But then we also got in touch with Robin Brown from Concerned Citizens Organized Against Lead, and then we met Kim Foreman. So we started to learn about lead and started to get understanding what was going on. And it was, it was a rough time, with children, your life being impacted by children who have lead poison and all the different things that come involved in their lives. And, I never asked the children problems like, what did you think? Or anything like this. So I had the opportunity to ask my daughter, and I said, well, what did this do for you? She said, Dad, I felt like I was retarded. And when she said that, it made me feel like I had let my child down. Just a bad situation. But when we think in terms of lead poison, and we talk about the togetherness and the prevention of lead poison, that's where I'm at today. That was 20 years ago. Now today, I feel better about where we at today, what we are accomplishing, because it's not about bickering as an adult. It's about helping the children. So what are we going to do to help the children? I have a lot of empathetic regard for children who have been lead poisoned, and I understand what they did. So I'm just looking for this situation to be resolved, and we do what we need to do, because the city can grow no bigger than its children. With that, that's it.
Brother Donnie, thank you. We're going to turn it over to you, Ms. Foreman and Ms. Stout. Thank you for all of your hard work on the recommendations. And we want an honest assessment of what you believe about the legislation and what we can do to make sure that it's rock solid. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to give folks an update, the Let's Save Cleveland Coalition now has over 250 members from pretty much every sector of our community that's needed to work with you to make sure that Cleveland is actually lead safe. And it's very exciting to have all those folks at the table ready to be in action. We're proud of the work of this legislation, of the Council President's leadership, of your leadership, Mr. Chairman, of your leadership, Vice Chair, and the Mayor and all of City Council around Ordinance 747 and Resolution 748. What's most exciting about this is that it is a bold, systemic shift toward primary prevention. That is what is going to make the difference here. That primary prevention is going to provide the foundation for achieving a lead safe Cleveland through the lead safe certificate requirement. We're also encouraged that Council has found both urgency and thoughtfulness in moving forward this legislation, and in historically just voting it out of committee here and moving it on through the process. It really makes me proud to be at the table here on a day where this has happened. It also makes sense to have a regional ramp-up period. It was discussed here. Councilman Conwell and others asked about it. We need that ramp-up period in order to build up a workforce of inspectors, in order to train contractors, in order to raise money, like Councilman Polensek has talked about, and Councilman Brancatelli, that we need for landlords, and also to have the systems for Director Blue Donald and others to have ready to go once March 1, 2021 comes about. We also think it makes a lot of sense to have the Let's Safe Auditor and the Let's Safe Advisory Board to do its work, and to have the disclosures for both tenants and sellers and buyers of housing in Cleveland. It will only make our market stronger. I will say also that the Let's Safe Advisory Board, the Let's Safe Coalition is ready to move with the new Let's Safe Action Board to come up with a solution for families that end up getting displaced because of having houses placarded. We need to have a solution to that issue, and to have this new Let's Safe Screening and Testing Commission. We're going to have you pull that together and to really establish best practices around screening and testing so that children, in addition to primary prevention, children are tested at 12 months and 24 months, as is called for by Medicaid, and realizing that 85% of all children in the city of Cleveland are on Medicaid. So we need to make sure that that's working well. So we applaud City Council on this really smart legislation. We hope that it moves forward through the process. And I'm going to hand it off to Abby Stout from Legal Aid to talk about a few areas that we think actually would help strengthen the legislation. And then Kim Foreman will talk a bit about what we're seeing, and then I'll close us out on time.
Thanks, Mark. Through the chair. I've been tasked with bringing to the committee a couple of concepts that we think do deserve additional deliberation by council. Two of these have been discussed at length today, and so they won't be a surprise, and the other one we didn't hear much about today. So first, we do think that these considerations would strengthen the legislation, so we ask that you consider them. We support the council's looking to amend the ordinance 747 to include conflict of interest language. There already exists conflict of interest language between landlords and inspectors that certify rental units to be Let's Safe. We think the language in the current code, section 24008 C4, has sufficient protections and should be found somewhere in the language of the code. So second, regarding the penalties, the coalition understands that this legislation seeks to align the system with existing rental registry penalties. We appreciate that this approach creates predictability for landlords and for property owners. As council continues to deliberate, we encourage council to prioritize the following concepts. First, the penalties should be strong enough to act as a disincentive. They should appropriately escalate to deter any bad actors. They should send the message to landlords. Getting a clearance examination isn't just the moral thing to do, but it's the financially responsible thing to do. Second, they should not be so punitive that good faith actors aren't able to navigate the system and recover, if necessary, from any violations. As we've said before, the Let's Safe certificate should not contribute to inequities in our community. And third, there should be absolute clarity in the penalty structure. Landlords should understand that the Let's Safe certificate, what it requires, and the associated penalties for not complying with those requirements. Penalties can only be a disincentive to the degree to which landlords know how they will escalate. And finally, the third topic to consider is that the coalition reiterates its recommendation to require that projects using City of Cleveland funding be Let's Safe or employ Let's Safe measures and work practices as defined by administrative rule. To demonstrate that the City of Cleveland is committed to leading the way towards a Let's Safe Cleveland, we urge council to make this bold stand. Taxpayer dollars will not contribute to our lead poisoning problem. The coalition believes that the city in large part fulfills this vision today. So memorializing it in Ordinance 747 will ensure that it remains the case long into the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for allowing us to come before you again. We know that legislation is only part of the solution. So we really look forward to continuing to work with you and building relationships and administration on other essential matters that are not connected to this legislation. So I do want to share some of the other important and related work that is being done by the coalition. Workforce development, in my mind, is an opportunity. I think that we can actually build a bridge between neighborhoods with folks who need this training. We found some very efficient ways we can get folks trained in a day. Lead safe workers, we will have contractors, but I think we need to think about that we can have lead safe workers and clearance technicians, and it doesn't take a long time to train those folks. And we could have a significant number of well-trained folks on the ground, but we also need to identify what the current baseline is and the capacity for inspectors, lead safe workers, and contractors, developing expanded training and certification program to meet the projected demand. We are also working to coordinate with other public and private sector partners, including the health systems and community health providers, schools, nonprofits, and our corporate sector partners. So we need the leadership to support this resource center, to start up the resource center delivery models, as well as support the implementation of this certificate with well-built and well-resourced systems. We also need cross-sector leadership on other systematic issues related to lead poisoning, like screening and testing, education, and public housing, reporting in public housing, schools, and daycares. But what I do want to highlight that we've already been actively working with community residents at the neighborhood and grassroots levels. And so Donnie is a part of the team that's really working hard to understand the legislation, understand how to translate that, and work with community. And so we want to support the legislation with on-the-ground and grassroots approaches and build the capacity of residents to understand and advocacy to ensure that we're accountable to the community. So they'll be evaluating our work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Foreman, and thank you, Mr. Durham. Mr. Durham, you have closing words.
If I may, just 3 items in closing out, Mr. Chair. One is that we introduced several items in our recommendations that we are very interested in continuing to work with City Council on, and that is source of income protections. The other item is right to counsel, which several council people at this table are very active with Legal Aid and others to move forward on, so that tenants who are facing eviction really have a right to legal counsel. And also just more support for affordable housing, as Chairman Polensek again so eloquently put, the need for funding for rehab throughout the community. Secondly, is really elevating research and evaluation as a top priority. I believe it was Councilman Conwell who said, you know, the policy is only as good as how we're measuring it. So we are working to, the coalition is establishing a committee around research and evaluation. When the coalition establishes committees, as I think we've proven, we move to action really quickly. And the goal there is to work to have both the community, city council, the administration, have the same set of metrics that we're going to measure whether we're successful or not. So that a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, we know whether we're meeting across the board the success we need to meet in order to have a Let's Save Cleveland. So we look forward to working with council and that committee to establish those metrics and those measurements in the best way that we can do it as a community. And then finally, to close out by in front of City Council, why not talk about money? So you may have read the news recently that with the leadership of State Senator Matt Dolan and others in the Senate right now, there is $2 million to help seed the Lead Safe Home Fund. We're working hard, hoping and praying that $2 million stays in the budget over the next 9 days as the budget gets finalized. And this would really spurred in large part by our state representatives and senators being knowledgeable about what was going to get acted on by city council here and the action that the city was going to take. Was really inspired to come up with that allocation of dollars. We look forward to working with council and the administration on capitalizing the new Lead Safe Home Fund, which is essential, as we've talked about, essential to the success of the implementation of this this legislation. Without money to assist with landlords, without money to have an effective Lead Safe Resource Center, without money to really help with the startup. One of our ideas is to help with partially paying for those fees, those testing fees that Scott mentioned for landlords as we're starting up the program. We're not going to be successful. And then finally, continuing to work at the state level around issues like oversight of RRP contracting and comprehensive lead-safe daycare policies. So we're very committed to doing that. Our policy committee is taking that on. Members of this council are part of that policy committee. And so that's on our agenda over the next couple of months. So finally, just Mr. Chair, and to all of council and the hardworking members of this committee, we just couldn't thank you more for taking bold leadership to enact this legislation and to be committed to working with the coalition as we are committed to working with you on making this successful and making Cleveland lead safe. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And just for the record, if you could, and just want to reiterate that any amendments, we have until July to make amendments, so all of these recommendations would have further deliberation as a council. And I'd ask that you give them to Ann Tilley, and then Ann Tilley will make sure that she works through me to distribute them to all of the council members so we can have these further conversations around all of the further deliberations that we need to have. So I want to make sure that you understand that. I will tell you that this council is going to have some significant discussions around money. I know that our process is not aligned with the state process. The state is, their cycle goes from, I think, July to June 30th. And ours, we really beef up our conversations around October, November. So we know how serious this is and how everybody needs to look at this. And we also plan on working with the coalition to reach out to the private philanthropic sector because we know that the city alone can't do this. I concur wholeheartedly with what my colleague, Councilman Leslie, said around taking this as an opportunity to really take a hard look at how we have safe, warm, and dry, affordable housing in the city of Cleveland. And I think that this is an opportunity to broaden that discussion, have that conversation, and make sure that we step up in that realm. So we take our partnership seriously. We'll have further discussions and we'll engage with you as we have those deliberations. As somebody said earlier, everything is not going to be perfect. I think Councilman Zone said that, but we won't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. We're going to have great, strong legislation, and at the end of the day, this entire community can be proud of. So thank you so much for all of your input. I do have a comment by Councilman Brancatelli, and I will let you know that the policy committee is always available if you want to reach out to them. If they want to have one-on-ones with the council members, I'm sure that some other folks will be. And I'll be remiss if I didn't say as well that Councilwoman Cleveland has reached out to me and she would like to be a co-sponsor on this legislation. So please note that Councilwoman Cleveland would like to be added as a co-sponsor to this legislation. Councilman Brancatelli.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of quick questions. Kim, you talked about the training. How often is RRP training available?
We actually, through the chair to the council, every once in a while I get a call to provide training, so I've done several free trainings for the community over the last few years, and there's some HUD dollars set aside for training, so I wanted to go back, look at that, and then continue to provide those free trainings. And I do request the support of the funding to start that process. So for me, that would be the first phase of any of this work, is to look at some resources to then do some training.
And the training is a one-day training is for RP?
Through the chair to the council, yeah, you could take a one-day training to be a lead safe worker. And there is a requirement to submit to EPA, so you could be registered through EPA. So there is a second step to that.
And I think one of the things I could point out, Mr. Chairman, what your committee did was really doing outreach and education is a big part of this, and letting folks know. And we need to figure out how to advertise to say, you know, we need to get a lot of our landlords to get trained, just so they can go work in their own homes. It's a much simpler path than people think of training. They're thinking they're going to be sequestering classes for 3 months or something. This is for RRPs to do basic work in their home. It's a one-day training, and we need to figure out how we continue to let folks know how often it's occurring.
And through the council to the chair, that's a 5-year certification. So at this point, when we started this with RRP in 2009, there were a series of free training, and it's a federal mandate. So landlords who wanted to work on their property should have gone through, they should be pretty much in their second round of that certification. So every 5 years.
Okay, great. And then for clearance technicians, and how often do we have training for the technicians and all that risk assessors?
Through the council to the chair, I've been working with Pete Dale from Lead Experts, who pretty much trains everyone in this field. And there haven't been a lot of opportunities for clearance technicians. So I see this as an opportunity to provide that training. Most folks have been trained as risk assessors, which is a higher level credential, but this is an opportunity to get more folks trained. But he is available to do that training, and I've in conversations with him and others around starting the workforce development conversation.
And the lead risk assessors, I think we talked about that earlier. You may know this answer. Do we know how many lead risk assessors are out there now?
No, but we can go to Ohio Department of Health website. The issue with that is a lot of folks that work for the city are risk assessors. So we do have a list, but yeah. So I think there's additional opportunities, and we just had several sessions of risk assessor trainings that we sponsored recently. So we have that's usually a class of 25 to 30 folks.
And just as a point of clarity, Mr. Chairman, a clearance test for a standard home is approximately $350, $400.
To the council chair, no. I would say it's $250. A risk assessment is more. A risk assessment would be more, $400 or $500. But if we monitor this correctly, I think we could keep the cost affordable if we kind of manage and monitor a trained group of citizens that we help vet.
And I think, I mean, part of the issue we're looking at, we all know well the disparity between the east side and west side. And Scott, I appreciate you coming here to the table, but the rents that folks get on the far west side versus the rents on the east side, especially neighborhoods like Union Mile, Slavic Village, Mount Pleasant, that's the challenge. I mean, so it's the same cost to get a clearance, the same cost for the work, but the return is the costs are being passed on to the tenants. What we're passing today is going to be an increase in rent. That's exactly what we're doing, because the rent's going to have to go up to be able to recover the costs that are being mandated to get these clearance. I think it's important. I support the legislation. I know we have to do the clearance, but I want to make sure we're clear on what we're doing here. And that's where we have to move the market. And so being able to have a pool of inspectors and being able to get clearance tests done timely and affordably is paramount right now. As that training starts to happen, we need to increase that pool, because passing this legislation, not having people do the tests and not having to do it affordably and timely is critically important for us, and so looking forward to that. Now, through the chairman, Mr. McDermott, you have had a number of sessions already in the public. We've had a couple of wonderful sessions on the east side and west side. And one of the areas that we're looking forward to also is engaging more landlords and meeting with more associations of landlords, apartment owners, et cetera. And as we move this along, Mr. Chairman, we talked about hosting some of those sessions, so make sure we communicate to folks that we get everybody engaged as much as possible. The landlords that I work with on a regular basis, none of this scares me that they're all doing this. They're all and making their homes ready, making them, improving them, making them safe, have been meeting the high quality standards on a regular basis, don't have outstanding violations. But we want to make sure that it's pretty seamless as we move into this to this line that folks don't run away from it. The last thing we want to do is dry up housing opportunities. And as was mentioned earlier in one of the sessions, we've already issued 400 vacate orders on families who did not pass the tests. And we don't want to have a cause and effect of evicting families out of their home because the houses can't get clearance tests. So I think this is all apparent to us that what we have to put in place to make sure this happens appropriately and seamlessly. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And thank you, Councilman Brandatelli. I know that you watch housing trends and all of those things very well. You're pretty much the resident expert on a lot of those things. But I also like what you said is that, you know, this is a bold move. It's something that we have to do, and also a lot of the great landlords that we know really want quality properties and great safe properties are already going to do a lot of this as well. So we definitely don't want any unintended consequences. That's why council has been very deliberate in how we have moved along with this. We have not rushed this process. We are always willing to hear and listen to more. I know that your committee is going to be hearing this on July the 23rd. And I look forward to attending as you have this committee because we do want to have rigorous conversations around this. But we also know that this is something that is a moral imperative to really try to make sure that we look at our community. So, and I think Rochester's here, and one of the things Rochester said is that they did not see a mass, a lot of unintended consequences.
Yeah, thank you. And I just want to make sure, one of the things that we're moving forward and Director Maness and I here today is our code partnership program, our Healthy Homes Initiative. We'll make sure we don't leave without, we are having an aggressive opportunity to put folks in the CDCs, working with landlords and working with families, so we can have, and that's an example that Rochester did, which was what they call customer service. But folks will out there making sure that we're communicating well with our families and making sure that we can do practical, get our PINK program going. I think we authorized more than $780,000 for PINK program vouchers this year. And so I think that is going to have a big step in helping transition to where we're getting to 2021. So if I can, Mr. Chairman, can you please add me as a co-sponsor?
Thank you. Councilman Brandatelli would like to be a co-sponsor on that legislation, so please add Councilman Brandatelli. Thank you for your comments, Councilman. I would give closing remarks to the majority leader, my good friend, Councilwoman Phyllis Cleveland, and then we'll join our partners in the auditorium for closing of the session. So Councilwoman Cleveland, you have the anchor. Councilwoman Cleveland, it should be on.
Hello? All right, well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your fine work and your leadership, Councilman McCormick, and to everybody here who was a part of making this summit the success that it has been. I was only here for half a day, but it was still a great turnout. Anytime you get an all-day session, people still here in the afternoon, so it's pretty good. So again, thank you to everybody who made this session happen and made it what it is. My point, I just wanted to state for the record, a couple of our colleagues brought up the need for affordable housing, and I just wanted to make sure that everyone is aware that, and I'm surprised Councilman Zone didn't bring it up, Councilman Zone, Councilman McCormick, and I, as well as members of the administration, with the record, that's have been working for over a year on affordable housing policies that we can implement in the city of Cleveland. So we are very, very much involved in that discussion, and there are going to be points where all of these task force and groups overlap. And so again, just understand that we are looking at it. We've been working and doing our looking at best practices in other cities. So it's something that the need and the lack of affordable housing in this community is something that we are very much in touch with, and it's high on the priority of the council.
Thank you so much, Councilwoman Cleveland. Mr. McDermott, Ms. Foreman, Ms. Stout, Brother Donnie, and also Mr.
Creighton.
What's his name?
Scott Craven.
Mr. Craven, thank you so much for your testimony, and thanks to all my colleagues today for sticking this out with us on the first true day of summer. Once again, we will be having a committee meeting with Councilman Brancatelli's committee in July 23rd, DPS, Development Planning and Sustainability, and then we will be hearing this as committee as a whole. So thank you. That being said, this committee of Health and Human Services is adjourned.
Thanks for watching TV 20. We are Cleveland.